is Tom Lewis, and it is Tuesday, August 10th, 2010. Tom, can you give us some background about who you were, how you got to the college in terms of your start?
Yeah, I grew up in East Hartford, and after I got my bachelor's at Central, I taught at Penny High School in East Hartford, which is now East Hartford High. And I had taken some geography courses as an undergraduate. The summer of '65 was one of those summers when we were trying to beat the Russians to the moon, and geography had been declared a critical discipline, and beating Russia and geography had been declared a science. And we were trying to catch up with them in science. So the summer of '65, I was offered a position as a student in a summer geography institute in urban geography at Rutgers University. And I got so excited about geography as a result of that institute, as I went to Clark University for a year, again on a government grant, and got a sixth year, what we would count as a sixth year, towards my teaching certificate. Went back and taught one more year, and then decided, well, as much as I love high school teaching, I really want to become a professional geographer. So Valerie and I moved to New Jersey, and I took residency for my PhD, and at the time MCC was hiring, and I had an interview with Fred Lowe and then with Eleanor Coltman, and lo and behold, I got a job here as an assistant professor of geography, and that was in the fall of '69. And that's how I came here.
That's interesting. So you didn't finish the doctorate program?
Well, yes, I continued to do research and writing for my PhD. It took me 6 years while teaching 4 courses here, but yes, I got my PhD in culture geography at Rutgers in 1976.
Good for you. Good. Can you talk about those early days, the interview process, for example, as it's compared to now?
Well, it was really quite straightforward and quite simple. You sat down, they asked you a few questions. There wasn't the concern with, how can I put it, sensitivity to cultural and racial differences that there are today. I had something going for me. I already had 5 years of high school teaching, and I had basically 2 master's degrees and was enrolled formally in a PhD program. And Fred was very interested in pursuing geography as a very important subject at this school, at MCC. So that's how I got the job.
Where were you located, and what do you remember about? I mean, I came the same year, so that was when Hartford Road campus was here. Where were your office?
My office was in Hartford Road on the 2nd floor. I think it was a closet before it was my office. But I was so excited to be a part of what I saw as a dynamic, growing school, and also we had bought a house on School Street in Manchester. I could literally walk to work. In fact, sometimes I did. I think it was about 1.5 miles altogether. And let's see, Jennifer was born in '67, so we had a little girl 2 years old. My son, Brendan, didn't come into the world about 4 or 5 years later. Of course, everything was either in the Hartford Road building, the old Cheney office building, or in what was, I guess, Bennett Junior High then. And I had a classroom in the basement of Bennett the first year. And I remember when we reached 20 students, a few of us were complaining that classes were getting too big. I can't remember, but I'm trying to think this morning. I may have had a class or 2 in Manchester High School, but I honestly don't remember that.
What were your observations about Fred Lowe? I mean, I hear mixed stories.
I'll tell you an interesting story. You recall, we had some pretty contentious faculty meetings in those years. There were a lot of politically suave people. Bill Dowd comes to mind. Fred Lipshears, and this was a particularly contentious one. I tried to keep quiet and listen because I was a new guy on the block, But I got up and said something that probably didn't make any sense to most people, and Fred sort of shot me down. And I sort of just curled down back into my chair. But indication of the kind of guy he was, the next morning he came and apologized. And I don't think that's happened to me since from an administrator. And from then on, how could I say anything negative about Fred Lowe? And he was a leader. He made it very clear to us that we were on a ship that had just sailed, and he expected to be at the helm. And if we didn't want to be a member of the crew, then we could jump ship at the next port. And I admired him for that. Yeah.
Can you talk any further, progressively through your career about the college?
Well, even when I taught high school, I thought that American schools really didn't give enough credits to scholarship, to the liberal arts, and learning our own history as well as world history and geography. So I sort of pursued that as a teacher, and I felt that scholarship was important. When I was here, I published 2 books. I published a number of articles in professional journals. I gave papers at professional organizations. I became officers in regional and national geography organizations. And I must say that this college supported me all the way. In fact, one of the readers that I had published, the college gave me a modest grant, but a grant, and also saw to it that I had typing services. And I've always felt grateful for that.
Good. Well, one of the things that we've heard from others is the kind of entrepreneurship that sort of evolved in that particular time. Did that have any impact on you? And people, well, I'll give you an example. John Sutherland came here, expressed purpose of developing an oral history program. Steve Kasama with the Alumni Association. Did that apply to you?
Well, one of the things that I think I can take credit for developing was the international studies program and the opportunity for students to travel abroad. The first couple of times I did it, I got no remuneration at all. I just felt it was part of the job, and I liked to travel. So I think the earliest one we did was maybe a half dozen students went to Bermuda. That was a blast. And I made sure that they not only had a good time, but they learned something about Bermuda's geology and geography. Took some students to Puerto Rico. As it turns out, my regional specialty in geography became the Caribbean. So I also took some students to Europe 2 times. By that time, I was getting a modest, the way it worked at first was if I got so many students, I would get a free passage. When we got to Europe, usually I had a few things to say about the places we were at, but the program we were involved in, the International Consortium, we had, for example, guides at the Louvre in Paris. We had professional guides all over Europe, and boy, did I learn a lot, as well as the students. A couple students that went on one of those trips fell in love and got married, and I was best man for that one. So you never know how these things pan out. I was also very active in the Manchester Historical Society with Sutherland. We started the Cheney Tour, which still goes on, and John and I kept saying, we won't have anybody this year, and each year we lucked out. We always had pretty good weather. I think there was only two walks in 20 years where it rained. And we pursued it anyway. I mean, rain or shine, we did it. But the point I'm getting to is we always had more people than we thought we would. And I guess hundreds of people have benefited from the Cheney Tours, and John and I certainly did.
Talk about the student at Manchester Community College. Was it the 13th grade, or what is this?
Well, I had a personal drive to sort of try to change, do as much as I could to change the image of community colleges as the 5th year of high school. That was one of the things I always tried to do. I'd go to national meetings and somebody would say, "Are you still at that community college?" And I never felt that way. I can still say, and I've been an adjunct at the University of Connecticut for 13 years since I retired, I can still say I had my best and my poorest students here. when I mean best, really good students. And one of the things you find here, and I suspect at other community colleges, you have a lot of older adults, particularly women, whose kids have gone to school and they never had a chance to get their degree, and they are driven. And sometimes I was commenting, look, it's okay. You don't have to get an A in everything. It's okay to get an A minus or maybe a B plus. I had one student from an Asian country. She took both sections of the introductory course I was offering that fall. In other words, she took my class not 3 times a week, but 6, just to make sure she didn't miss anything. I had students, I tried to push scholarship. I had a couple students who gave papers at the regional meeting of the Association of American Geographers. And yes, you got students that shouldn't be here, but I found that at the University of Connecticut also. The difference is they don't admit it. So I never really complained about students here. By and large, I thought they were an excellent bunch, and they did what I thought they should do. Yeah.
I want to go back to the interview process. It's my bugaboo, personal bugaboo. I hate to introduce this to you, but we have the transition to rather detailed search committees with representations from all over the place, interviews to the point at which you perform for a group and so forth, with the expectation that it would produce much better results. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, since I've been at UConn, and also when I was here, I was on search committees, and you're right, it's just become almost unmanageable, ad nauseum, and I really don't see that much difference in the results.
Okay. So, I mean, that's the sense I had.
Yeah.
I think of the early teachers coming here. We had our share of those who ought to be somewhere else, but I don't know that that's changed substantially as a result of the new process. Want to talk about any of your colleagues that you'd like to?
Well, very early on, I had a little in my early days, I was too much of a perfectionist. I tried to do everything 100%, and even myself, I wouldn't settle for less than an A job, and I managed to get myself into the hospital with depression. And it was a steady stream of faculty here who came to see me and to cheer me up. Sebastian Moudry became a very good friend. John Sutherland and I, almost like brothers. We laughed and we cried together. And in those days, a lot of what we did was seat of the pants. You know, if you needed a model, you had to make it. There wasn't the money to buy it. Always fighting for equipment. Lost track of the question.
People.
Oh, people. Oh, wonderful people. Eleanor Coltman stands out. Fred Lipshers. Fred took me aside. Sid Lipshers.
Sid.
Ted took me aside the first week, and he wasn't political. He was just saying, look, it's impossible to do the job 100%, so be satisfied at maybe 90 or 85, and that was good advice. I never really got involved in the politics of this place, and perhaps that was a mistake on my part, because maybe I could have helped change things that needed to be changed. But on the other hand, I always thought my job was to teach and leave the politics to other people, and perhaps that's the reason when I left here I hadn't made any enemies, I don't think. But we were a family, and early on I remember the softball games in the spring that we'd have at Martin Park. And if I recall, it was also a chance to break bread together and talk about this, that, and the other thing, meet husbands and wives as well as children, and those were fun. But of course, over the years we grew, we just got too large for that. I remember how elated I was when we learned that we got the money to build a low building and buy this property. I remember I was shocked when, was it not East Hall that burned. East Hall was the faculty offices, but
The library.
Yeah,
bookstore.
that was a shock
Yeah,
because
Student Center, I think.
we in those days we were bursting at the seams, and in order to lose a building, that was just tragic. But we managed to find a way to deal with it. Also, again, there was a period. Let's see, I've been gone 13 years. I was here 27. Probably about 10 years into the job, there was no money, so a bunch of us got together and painted just about every classroom on the lower campus. Do you think that would happen today? I'm not so sure. Also, and I'm not criticizing because I wouldn't want to be the person who have to make the decision, but we went through with classes with a blizzard coming. And I don't remember the year, but there were a few of us who had evening classes who wound up spending the night in the old administration building on the old campus. And at first, we're kind of angry about this, but we had a hell of a good time. We managed to get through it when the sun began to shine the next morning. And that I remember that. But when I wasn't feeling well, I got a lot of support here. People filled in for me, and I came back a stronger person.
Okay. You want to talk about your later teaching career as compared to the early ones? I mean, was it pretty much a straight and narrow path and not much happened?
Well, to move into this complex, not this complex, which is brand new, but to move into the low building, I remember being the first person to use a green board in that room.
Mm-hmm.
That was a real thrill. And whereas before, you thought maybe I have to bring my own board. And that's another thing. We had classes all over the place. So my car was an office. Geographers need globes, they need maps. I was always carrying stuff, and people would kid me. I'd be walking across campus with a globe, and somebody would say, "Oh, you got the world in your hands." And then I'd say, "Well, wouldn't that be nice?" But to not have to bring a lunch, to have a little cafeteria, that was nice. I remember the thrill of when they dedicated the lower campus, the what were supposed to be temporary buildings. That was quite a day. And I knew some of the people who were on the committee that put this college together, and I was pleased to be a part of that.
Were you not on the naming committees?
Yes. I just got tired of sending students to Building A, Building B, and I felt that the college was developing enough of a history that we should be naming buildings after people, or alumni, or something. So that began to happen. The auditorium on the lower campus, we named Alumni Auditorium, and there were a couple of others. And I remember going to one president, who I won't name, suggesting that a building be named after a very early a person who very early on was an advocate for a community college in this region. And this person said, "Well, if somebody gives us $1 million, we'll name a building after that person." And I didn't like that response.
Mm-hmm. Any other things that you want to talk about that may have been missed in the conversation that's of importance to you? Maybe milestones, maybe people, maybe other programs that you were engaged in?
Well, I'd like to point out that I don't think, and Valerie would agree with this, I don't think there was ever a day when I felt that I had made a bad decision to become a college teacher or had made a poor decision coming here. I always look forward to coming to work. I enjoyed working with just about everyone. There was nobody I disliked. There were some people I thought made some bad decisions, but I always tried to think about how I would have acted if I had made that decision. And I feel if you can't walk in the moccasins, you shouldn't criticize the Indian. Let me tell you one story that I'll never forget. It took me 8 years to write my Geography of Connecticut. I largely did the research during summers or going to the State Library, the Yale Library, after classes were over or before classes. And, every summer you'd come back and there'd be a little show and tell, what this person did and what that person did. And this particular dean said, and Tom Lewis wrote a book this summer. I damn near fell out of the chair, and I want to say, Christ, it took me 8 years. You don't do that. But we did have some, how can I put it? We had a few faculty members and administrators who really didn't have a clue how much work was involved in getting other than a mail-order PhD, but I tried not to let that get to me. For example, I was struggling with the last year of my dissertation, and I had a deadline in order to get my degree in '76, which I did, and somebody stopped in the door who was doing a mail-order degree. How's it going? I said, oh, God, I'm not sure I'm going to make it. And he says, well, I know what you're going through. And I said to myself, you don't have a clue what I'm going through. But on the other, that's really not a part of the college. That's a part of things I kind of remember. But it was a crusade, and I was glad to be a part of that crusade. But all of a sudden, it became apparent that there was going to be a buyout, and I wasn't even thinking about retiring in '69. It never crossed my mind because I was having a great time. But Valerie and I took a cruise to the Caribbean, and we sat down with the papers, and we pulled up deck chairs in the lee, and she had a little calculator, and we massaged the figures, and it became apparent I would have been a fool to stay. Mm-hmm. So I jumped ship in '69. I came back in the fall and taught 2 courses, and that same fall I was asked, basically what happened in the geography department at UConn is that they had lost a person who didn't get tenure, and then they didn't have money to hire a full-timer. So I got a call, would I come up and teach 2 courses as an adjunct, and also run the Connecticut Geographic Alliance, which is an educational arm of the National Geographic educational group, the group of the National Geographic which promotes geographic education. So interesting enough, I had retired in June, but the following fall I was teaching 2 courses here and 2 courses at Storrs. And I have stepped down. I'm not going to be teaching this fall. I've just finished 45 years of teaching, if you include the 5 years I taught at Penny High School in East Hartford. So I just felt, and I had a little, as you know, I had a little health scare in December. I almost didn't get out of the hospital, but almost went straight to the funeral home. And when that was over, I thought, you face mortality, maybe it's time to step down. And there are things you cannot do if you sign a contract to teach. And so the first thing Valerie and I are going to do this September is take a cross-Canada train trip. We're going to be gone 14 days altogether with 5 days on the train. As you know, I'm a rail advocate and a rail fan.
You and Bob Richardson. If you don't want to, that's okay. But obviously, you have a unique situation. You keep referring to Valerie, and for purposes of record, that is your wife. She is your wife. And clearly, she was in an administrative position for the state. Do you want to talk about that and its relationship to you, or was it not?
Well, not as much as you would think. She wound up having a very high-powered, not much power, but a lot of stress job. And she'd come home and I'd say, you got 5 or 6 minutes to vent, and then we'd cut it. Mm-hmm. But I must say that any success that I've had has to do largely with the support I got here, and also the support I got from my wife and both my in-laws and my parents. Mm-hmm. That spring of '65, when I suggested to Valerie that we go to Rutgers and I be a part of this institute, if she'd said something like, I don't think that's a good idea or it's stupid, I wouldn't be having this interview with you right now. I'm very lucky. As far as her job is concerned, I used to jokingly tell people I slept with my boss because she, as you know, became Commissioner of Higher Education. But by and large, she was very guarded about the things that she said, and I didn't press her. I could tell you some very interesting stories, but I'm not going to for obvious reasons. You would not believe some of this. No, you know. I think you're into it enough. Yeah. Some of the stuff that goes on is you couldn't make it up. Those stories.
One last comment, short of anything you want to add. If somebody were hired recently and came to you and said, Dr. Lewis, what should I do and ensure my success and happiness at this institution? And you happen to be teaching geography. what would you say?
In other words, if the person is asking
New
me,
job, just came to Manchester Community College and wants some tips from you about how he or she should...
well, I've had that role at UConn with the graduate students I've worked with. That's one difference that between there and here, and I really enjoy working with these young people, these young students. I think the teaching part should come first, and I'd be interested in knowing what the teaching background is, and I would say, look, don't be afraid to let me come into your classroom. I'm sure I could help you. There was one evaluation I got here where, and I really liked this guy and still do, but I remember him writing he was over-prepared for the class. What? And you have to be prepared. You've got to be ready for just about any question. And also, I think an important piece of advice is if you don't know, say so, but do say, well, I'll find out, and do find out, because if you don't, that student, he won't forget that you didn't find out, or she.
I remember I was evaluated by my boss who said I had a messy desk. Not a well-organized...
Well, yeah, and I'm probably the most organized person in the world, but my desk looked like a tornado had just swept through.
Are there any humorous things that you can think of that you'd like to share with us that you didn't mention?
Yes, I will. One time, Eleanor Coltman and Tom Connors and Dave Gidman had a small trailer behind the Hartford Road building. I mean, talk about messy desks. Even Eleanor, who was an organized person, and books were piled to the wall. And I saw a book that I wanted, and Eleanor was sitting there. And she had, Eleanor had a nice figure. And I stood up, and I reached for the book, and of course it fell down. And when it fell, I went to reach for it, and I came right down on Eleanor's chest. And we both went into convulsive laughter. Now, if that were to happen today, I'd probably be in front of a kangaroo court, being not because of Eleanor, but somebody might have reported me as being a pervert or something. I'll never forget that. And she laughed, and so did I. And Gidman, knowing him, probably had something that he had to comment on about it, but I don't remember what it was.
Any last things?
No, I just want to reiterate that this was a great place. I always call it a miracle place because miracles took place here. One quick example of the type of thing that happened here. I always try to encourage, because I taught general study students at the high school, and I came from middle class background. I was the first person to go to college in my father's family. And I try to encourage what we now call minority students. And isn't that labeling? Mm-hmm. And I had a black student who sat way in the back. But I remember he was very quiet, but occasionally asked a very thought-out question. So I encouraged him one day to sit in the front, which he did. And one day he came in to talk with me, and he didn't look me straight in the face. He sort of looked down, and he was sort of mumbling. And I thought, I'm going to take a chance. So I said, look, sit up straight, and don't say after everything you say to me, and look me in the eye. And I was kind of shaking because how's this going to pan out? Well, he's a successful lawyer today. In my conversation with him, I found out he was tutoring students in the North End of Hartford. He's a successful lawyer he went to Howard University, which is a very good black school. And how did I find this out? Because he wrote me to tell me he was thanking me to making him sit up straight and look me straight in the face. So that's... Oh, and another quick one. I got a card once from a girl who went on to major in geography at Central, and I got a postcard, and the postcard basically said, I'm at latitude blank, 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 and longitude blank, 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 and of course I had no idea where it was, so I had to look it up, and she was in Sweden. So that's the kind of stuff that happened. Yeah. When I think of MCC, I smile.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.